Okay, everyone, welcome to another episode of Eleusinia Talks. I am Jessica, the founder of Eleusinia, and I am here with a very special guest. We have Andrés Gómez Emilsson here visiting us, who is one of the founders of the Qualia Research Institute. And he is a very special character for us because a lot of our program has origins and base in a lot of his work regarding consciousness and the mathematical nature of it, and just a lot of his work with Qualia Research Institute. So welcome, Andrés.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's amazing being here. I'm very, very pleased.
Yes. So you've enjoyed your time at the retreat so far?
Oh, it's incredible. Yes.
That's good.
Thank you.
Really good. So I want to introduce you to our audience here. And I have some questions for you about how to, let's say, start consuming your content, because it's played a pretty big role in my development, of my understanding of consciousness. And I would like to, so how would you suggest someone start getting into your content and just in general, from the Qualia Research Institute?
Excellent question. I like to start a podcast and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Introducing a little bit of diversity of sensations.
Oh, okay. All right.
This one is,
some new Qualia.
New Qualia. You probably haven't experienced it, or maybe at a club or something randomly you have stumbled upon it. It's Eau Sauvage by Dior.
Oh, okay. So we're going for scents.
Scents, yes. It's not that I believe in big brands or I want to advertise them or anything like that. But big brands do recruit very talented perfumers.
Exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So they do make good products. They're extremely ridiculously overpriced, of course. The actual cost of the juice is
talent costs too.
So. Talent cost, yes. And advertisement and all of that. But this one I like it a lot because it has a beautiful citrusy type set of top notes, but it also has kind of like Vietnamese salad as a kind of note. It's
Vietnamese salad, like the papaya salad?
Yeah.
Citrusy, yeah.
Yeah, very citrusy.
Very interesting.
Very bergamot based.
There you go.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And this is one way. I mean, it's kind of like a psyop in some way.
Okay.
To get people interested in consciousnness and qualia. It's like appreciate.
We're going to have to go over some vocabulary words to make sure that the audience is catching up. Because even the word qualia is something that isn't part of the regular everyday vocabulary for many people. So how about we start with defining that?
Yes. Okay. So let's start very simple. I mean, ultimately, we can arrive at an understanding of these concepts by relating them to concepts that are more familiar to people. Okay. So we talk a lot about sensations, right? Like people are very obsessed with sensations. It's like, well, this food, it's bad or it's good, doesn't taste appropriate. People have opinions, right? Like, oh, this song, I don't like it, Okay. Or, I love this artist, right? But here's the thing. We tend to imagine that the sensations are kind of coming from outside and we're sensing them. There used to be these drawings in medieval philosophy of tentacles coming out of the eyes that are kind of sensing the world around. Okay. To try to explain what does it mean to feel or sense something? So here's, kind of a spoiler is that as far as we know, there are no tentacles coming out of your eyes. What's happening is that there's photons, light from the outside environment hitting your retina. And then there is a complex cascade of neural processing that happens until it reaches your visual cortex and your thalamus enters in resonance with all of your brain. And the actual sensation of colors of light are happening inside your brain. So, and the paint with which your visual field is decorated would be the qualia of visual sensations. Okay. Maybe as a kid, you wondered, is the blue that I see the same blue that other people see? Right. Yeah. So, or
you watch those movies where someone magically, there's a body switch and wonder, how does that feel? Does that person see the same color that I do? Is their experience of blue the same? Yeah. I always wonder, would it be? What would it be like to have a complete switch like that?
Yeah. No, I mean, my guess is that people see the world quite differently.
I imagine so. Yes.
It might not actually be that much kind of like how low-level sensations are processed, like, the painting in your visual field.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which people feel the world very differently is how they manage attention. Like, what do they pay attention to?
Okay.
And how does the attention move from one thing to another? Somebody who's like let's say like more on the spectrum of autism might be focused a lot on kind of like the little details. Is like, oh yeah, like that shape, like that texture, and like, the thing around your neck.
Right.
Like obviously they might not see your face as much, like it's kind of like scanning for like little details. Whereas somebody who's kind of like more empathizer and kind of in the other side is like, no, they're like paying attention to like your face and how you're moving and how you're feeling. And the details are kind of irrelevant. They fade into the background to some extent. People experience the world very differently. And the way in which the world shows up to somebody would be the collection of qualia that they have.
Okay.
And it is theoretically possible that the mapping between visual, inputs like light to the colors that we feel could be different from person to person. Meaning that, let's say there's this thought experiment called the inverted spectrum thought experiment, where literally it's posited that, okay, when I see blue, what you see is actually yellow. But because every time you've seen yellow, we call it blue.
Right.
There's no way for us to figure that out, right?
Okay, yes.
Unless you were able to find a way to describe that very quality of experience in a way that isn't just in terms of references to other qualities of experience, because then...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Then you're stuck.
There's no Rosetta Stone between individual experiences to just like plan that out.
Exactly. So here's, with that introduction, there's like these two terms, qualia, which is the raw way in which experience presents itself.
Okay.
The quality of sound, the sound feelings, the
my experience of the orange of your hat.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And
or the scent.
Or the scent
that we just tried. Yes.
Yes. What do you think of it?
I think it's interesting. I mean, these scents always change as they dry.
Yeah.
As the alcohol dissipates.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I really like it. It's in my top 10.
Top 10, okay.
Not maybe not top 5, but it's top 10. Consciousness has many meanings, a lot of definitions. I mean, I could probably give you like 10 different meanings of the word consciousness.
I think that's being super interesting. We don't really define consciousness that well.
Yeah.
We define unconscious, but in the level, how much consciousness is present is often measured for medical purposes.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But how much presence of consciousness there is.
Yes.
But what exactly is consciousness that's a tough one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, every single definition of consciousness is interesting, is what I would say. Like some people define it, or like they focus a lot in kind of the meaning of consciousness as awareness of your environment. Other people define it as like capacity to recognize that you're a person, kind of like self-consciousness, like that you're a self, self-awareness. They think that's consciousness. Some people define it in terms of problem solving. Like if you can do problem solving, then you have consciousness. And then by definition, an AI must be conscious. Just by definition.
Oh, yeah.
But I think there is one meaning of consciousness that is the most exciting, the most beautiful, and most interesting. And that is the experience you're having right now. Like it's experience focused. It's like the collection of qualia values, as we call it, like the specific type of qualia. And the way in which they're strung together, they're put together, they're bound together. And that whole thing that is your experience is a consciousness or a moment of consciousness.
Okay.
And so with that definition, when you're dreaming, you're conscious because you're having experiences.
Right.
Somebody who's comatose, but maybe has like some flicker of a thought, that would be consciousness. It doesn't matter if they're not aware of their environment. Or somebody who's at a party and they're just not connecting with other people, like which would be kind of the meaning of like social consciousness, which a lot of people think about, they're still conscious. It doesn't matter if like they're not relating to others. So in any one of these examples, I'm talking about, is there experience or not?
Right. Experience.
Experience.
And that which is experienced is qualia, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe that, answers that question, hopefully.
Yes. Yes. So we were defining qualia, but so we do borrow quite a few of, let's say, vocabulary words from your work that I've seen so far with the Qualia Research Institute and in your blog posts. And one of them is like, you brought up a word that I had not experienced before. It's called valence. Yes. Like, cause like we sit here and like we defined what is qualia. Now then valence, we're getting into like the quality of qualia.
Yes.
So can you explain what exactly is valence? I've never heard the word before. What does it mean?
Yeah, valence is kind of confusing because there's also chemical valence. Most people kind of like
right from chemistry.
And like to really understand a valence, like it's wonderful. We already defined consciousness and qualia, because that allows us to understand, hey, valence is a property of an experience. It's not a property of the outside world. So when you eat something that is very delicious, the deliciousness of it would be a valence quality.
Okay.
Now, when your hand gets stuck in the car door, you hit your hand or something and you feel pain. That pain sensation is a property of your experience. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it feels unpleasant and you want to get away from it, that it would be negative valence.
Negative valence, low valence.
So the thing is that, I do think it collapses into a single number for each experience. However, if you want to have like a more rich understanding of it, mm-hmm. you have to look at the collection of sensations that are present in a given experience.
Okay.
And how they're related to each other. And there's a lot of texture. I mean, it could be, for example, that your visual field is like very ugly. You're looking at something legitimately very repulsive to you. Could be. While you're, tasting something delicious.
Oh, that's complicated.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So that would be a mixed valence state. That means some aspects of your experience are positive, some aspects of your experience are negative. Now, in some sense, they do kind of add up. Like you consider the negative like a negative number and the positive a positive number. And then you kind of like make some kind of calculus. And oftentimes like, like going to a concert, for example, just after a breakup or something, like, hey, you need really bad to pee or something, but the music is amazing and you just like smoked a joint and like you're just so immersed in it. That's a mixed valence experience, but it's very net positive regardless. Where like maybe the breakup is in the back of your mind, very thin, needing to pee is also kind of like in the background. So the most of your experience is just very positive. So great. That's
so one experience that comes to mind for me is, okay, so let's say the last mile of a marathon.
Yeah.
You are in a high valence state because like you're self-actualizing. You're doing something that has value to you. But you know what? Everything hurts.
Yes.
And there's nothing about that experience that looks pleasant.
Yes.
But so that's what comes to mind when I think about like the complex valence.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In that case, I would say something like, kind of like some of the endorphins of running.
Right.
But then also, your spirit, your sense of like accomplishment and self-actualization, that is felt in the field, right? Like that is a flavor of experience that is, part of the soup. And maybe it's actually a very good soup, even though the body hurts.
Right.
It's like eating very spicy food, but that like has like a lot of rich flavor.
A little pain with your pleasure, yes.
Yeah, it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the words become like really useful to us here at the retreat when describing like very complex sensations. Like psychedelic experience is a complex sensation, very complex. And I think that we end up like really falling into these very simple words that like good trip, bad trip. Good is a very common word, but it's also I don't feel like it's specific enough to really describe these sensations.
Yeah.
Because it has a lot of baggage, a lot of associations that could come with it. When you say something is good, does it mean that it tastes good? Does it mean that it is morally good? Does it mean that you're being a good person? Or so when it came to or being the same applies to bad. Sometimes the most high valence experiences in a psychedelic state, they can be a little bit like that last mile of the marathon, where when you're looking at this person with tears coming down their face, it's a very complex thing. Yeah. And using a term like valence has been much more useful for us. So yeah. I want to thank you for introducing me to that concept.
Awesome.
Because it's really helped me to describe something that is quite complex.
Yeah. And, like there is actually kind of like some resistance to thinking about it. I've encountered in people. Let me just explain, which is that exactly as you said, like good and bad becomes very loaded.
Very loaded.
Very loaded. Like this is good food. Because there's two aspects.
Is it good because it's good for you? Is it good because it has pleasant associations in the past? Is it culturally good? Is it, there's so many, it's just, the word good is not complex. It's not good. Sometimes it's easier to describe complex things using very precise language.
Yeah.
Because that allows you to layer it, to really get more specific about things.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in a very technical way, valence refers to the goodness or badness of an experience in the moment, just like a precise...
Without the baggage, right?
Without the baggage. Mm-hmm. And then, once that is very clear, it's like, okay, yeah, this, like, what is the valence of this one experience? Let's note that down.
Right.
And then we can also ask, well, okay, maybe the unpleasant sensations that you're having are playing a role that are important in your development, for example.
Okay.
And I find that people kind of confuse that and almost kind of like they reject the idea of like valence because they will say like, oh yes, but like actually pain can be good. And it's like,
oh, that gets complicated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, hold on a second. Let's first get our terms very clear.
Right.
Describe an experience. It's kind of your that technical detail for describing a piece of art, right? Like describing it as it is in the moment.
Very specific.
Very specific. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, it's very, a term that I would like to introduce is, for example, equanimity, which is experiencing bad valence without reacting to it and just let it be. Now, I don't want to say like this generalizes to every kind of negative experience, but the truth is that, yeah, for example, in the psychedelic state, when you have quote unquote a bad trip, you're having like a very intense negative feeling about the universe. Getting caught up in it will make it worse. Whereas like if you just accept it for what it is and just let it be, it will unravel itself, at least in many people's experience. Oh. It can sort of like slowly work its knots out. And you might need another psychedelic experience actually to continue the process. A lot of people are kind of like, well, if you had one bad trip, that just means psychedelics are not good for you or something. But
no,
not really.
I mean, I can say I feel like I personally have had quite the spectrum on that side, and it doesn't necessarily mean that to me.
Yeah, exactly. So in the process of development of a human, psychological development, spiritual development, as it were, there are points that are quite unpleasant. But they're part of kind of like a bigger arc. Mm-hmm. And experiencing and accepting those unpleasant moments can actually be very crucial for the unfolding of something much more beautiful and holistic.
Balanced,
yeah. However, this doesn't invalidate the concept of like that we can describe precisely and very technically.
Yes, and that low valence in the moment, it sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks. So, I do remember a while back ago seeing some chart. I think that you had shared or put somewhere that was, talking about energy levels with valence, high valence, low energy. Would you explain that part too?
Yeah. There's two charts. I'm not exactly sure which one you mean, because there is one about the logarithmic scales of pleasure and pain.
Okay.
And then there's also one about like the DMT space, which is more about the energy. And the valence is kind of implicit there, but it's a little bit more complicated. Do you know which one?
I don't think it was either one of those. I think it was like the idea of having a high energy, low valence experience. It's conscious, high energy, low valence experience is like very intense low valence sensations versus let's say a low energy, high valence experience is more just like peace.
Yes.
That I remember seeing. Does that recall?
Yes. Yeah. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah, valence and arousal.
Yes.
Yes. So this is, from like affective psychology. It's been talked about for a long time. That if you do, there's like these statistical techniques called factor analysis, principal component analysis. If you do that on, for example, like how words cluster together, or how people describe experiences, or ratings over experiences, there's many ways to get there. If you compress that into just two dimensions, these two axes, arousal and valence, always show up as the two main factors. And that's like usually what we communicate a lot. It's kind of like how good, like the quality of the experience, but then how much of it there was.
Right.
That is
like turning up the volume on that conscious experience.
Exactly. So you could have like, let's say like a very, very, very quiet experience that is very perfect, very peaceful. So that would be like low arousal, high valence.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But then you could also have like an explosive, beautiful supernova experience, like on 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah, euphoria.
Enormous euphoria, like MDMA like stuff. That would be high arousal, high valence. It's like a lot of energy, and it's very beautiful. And so all of the combinations are possible. Just to complete the square is kind of like depression would be low arousal, low valence, anxiety, high arousal, low valence.
Say high arousal, low valence. I always thought of like, lemon juice and a paper cut.
Yeah.
Intense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, the truth of the matter is like it's even a little bit more complex, because that chart applies also to every sensation in your experience.
Oh, yeah. But that's what makes the chart useful, because it applies across multiple things.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a psychedelic experience is very complex, right? Like if you take a couple, like more than 2 grams of mushrooms, it will be like, well, I'm having these beautiful, peaceful sensations here, but this part is screaming. It's like, are you screaming? It's like, no, there's like, is this complex painting of these interrelated like qualities of valences. Right.
Okay, so I have another question for you. Next one. Another part of your vocabulary word. The idea of neural annealing.
Yeah.
The concept of annealing.
Yes.
We give like a really let's get started kind of explanation on that that front.
Yeah. I'll there's 2 approaches I will use, and they're kind of like painting different aspects or ways of seeing these. The first one is metallurgy. When you work with metals, if you're using a metal industrially for a while, it develops a lot of kind of like little imperfections, and it becomes brittle and unusable. Essentially, you can say like it was worked, and like now you can't use it.
Okay.
And it's like, hey, how are you going to fix that? Because we're talking about like, the atomic structure of the metal.
Yes. I'm trying to think of an explanation for it that someone would, because not many people work in metal, right? That's not something, but I think that, many people can probably relate to that like childhood memory of roasting marshmallows with, coat hangers. I'm not saying we should have done it, but that's yes, roasting marshmallows with coat hangers. So you take the wire coat hanger and you unwrap it. If you bend it back and forth, you create all of those stress points that make it brittle. That'll make it break.
That's an awesome example. Oh my God. Yes. Yes. It's very relatable. Exactly. No, not everybody works
Not everybody had parents that didn't care about them and let them roast marshmallows on, who knows what that metal is treated. It has a coating on it that probably we should not have been roasting marshmallows on them, but that's my history, yes.
And that's how I got lead poisoning.
Yes. That's how I ended up here.
Yes. So, yeah, no, that's a fantastic analogy. So,
yeah.
Now, if you take that and you heat it up above what is called its recrystallization temperature, which is like, then it kind of becomes very, very malleable for a bit. And then if you let it cool slowly, give it its own time, then the atoms will like rearrange again into
recrystallize,
symmetrical lattice.
The stress points are relieved.
Yes. And then it's not brittle anymore.
Yes, and you can start doing it again.
Yes, exactly.
It. And then once it gets brittle, you can heat it up again, and it relaxes the stress points. And so, how do we relate this to neural annealing?
Yes. So
because we're not cooking anybody's brains here. That's
only metaphorically.
Only metaphorically. Yes.
Yeah. As we grow, we develop like models of the environment of other people, and those models, they served a purpose in its time when we were in a particular context. And sometimes they generalize, like what you learned when you were like 5 years old in kindergarten or like whatever, it might generalize to adulthood in some interesting ways, but sometimes they don't, right? But they're like really deeply entrenched, kind of these, what is called like priors, like your expectations of the world are kind of these crystallized structures. And similar to metals, we posit that because we use them a lot, they actually become kind of brittle and overused. Now, for kind of like, recovering that malleability and usability, even just like, for example, going for a run or like going to a sauna or something like that might kind of like do the trick of kind of like annealing them again.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things that we do that are kind of like energy raising activities. I mean, I could list like ice bath, high intensity interval trainings, saunas, eating very hot peppers.
Something to flood the senses.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, something that overwhelms the capacity for these priors to metabolize or digest this information or these patterns, this input. But a much more extreme and intense version of this is psychedelics. So, for example, you take DMT or psilocybin at a high enough dose, it actually might be enough to sort of like melt these underlying structures and then forge completely new priors.
Okay.
That then, if you have a good experience or you experienced a lot of equanimity with it, more it would be a more precise way of putting it, because most psychedelic experiences will have like some mixed elements. And then you let it cool slowly in its own pace without forcing it in any way. What will happen is that you will have these new priors, these new primitives with which to process the world.
Okay.
And the idea is that, a lot of trauma is kind of these overused, stale kind of like priors that we have, where your brain or your mind essentially said, these actions are dangerous. Don't do them. But they might be just like outdated. And I mean, okay, like that could be a very adaptive in some circumstances, but oftentimes no. Oftentimes it's like, no, just something bad happened there and it just does not generalize. But your priors believe that they can be generalized and they don't. And so we keep repeating the same the same psychological process again and again, even though they don't work.
Okay, that's the explanation for neural annealing. And so there's another bit of vocabulary word that I picked up from following your content. There is conscious studies related, like about the binding problem.
Oh my God.
Yes. Can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah. Yes. If we are all made of atoms, and those atoms are related with forces, at a large scale, you have like 100 billion neurons in the brain.
Okay. Some more than others, right?
Sorry? Some more than others, yeah. I think like the latest number is like 86 billion.
Okay.
Yeah, let's round it to 100 billion. How is it possible that these 100 billion neurons, spatially distributed, can simultaneously contribute to a unified experience? And here's the important step to realize is that an experience has a lot of information simultaneously. It feels like time is moving. You may even, some people don't believe this because they say like, well, but I'm paying attention to only one thing at a time. But no, yes, you're paying attention to one thing at a time. But when you pay attention to something, it's contextualized by a lot of other sensations.
Okay.
And so even just, very atomic kind of precise attention actually contains a lot more information than what you're paying attention to. There is a field of awareness, is a term for the aspect of your experience you're not paying attention to, but that is contextualizing what you're paying attention to. All of that information is happening simultaneously. But, there's like a limit in the speed of light in how information can travel. And if you just think of the brain as a bunch of atoms, moving together, there's just no kind of like principled way of saying, yes, that snapshot of the brain is somehow like unified and creates an experience. And like the brain doesn't have a natural boundary. Like the boundary is, it's made of some materials, but it's not special. It's not a special boundary. It's not a metaphysical boundary that says like, everything within the brain is part of the same thing and outside is a different thing. How you categorize things is kind of arbitrary. It has to do with how useful that categorization is. If an alien saw us, they might actually categorize in a very different way. They might say like, humans actually like left side is one person and right side is a different person. They might have like a very different way of parsing the world.
Okay.
So the fact that our brain is within a skull is not objectively something that will make everything inside work as a unit or be a unit. And the binding problem gets even more complicated once you realize that it's not just that all of that qualia is happening simultaneously, it's also that it has intricate structure. Like I guess there's a ducks in here and I'm seeing your face and I'm seeing the background and you guys are seeing a screen and you're also seeing the context of the screen and all of those qualia have a precise position and they're related in a very precise way. So the question is like, how does that happen? And it really legitimately doesn't seem consistent with a worldview where we're made of atoms and forces. So that is a binding problem. Now, at QRI, actually, we kind of like flip it around. And actually we say, hey, no, the view that we're made of atoms and forces is not the modern view of physics. Since the 19th century, when electromagnetism, Faraday and Maxwell, they like the main kind of like aesthetic change or frame of mind that they had was, no, the universe is made of fields. And fields is kind of like a sheet, like kind of like a bed sheet. And that is kind of like moving around and there's like when you can tense it or you can kind of like send a little wave on it. So everything is made of those fields. And, in a technical way, the way they behave is according to differential equations, which essentially just means that, well, if there's like a pattern of tension that is moving in a certain direction, it will continue to move. There's kind of like inertia for patterns of tension. And when patterns of tension meet, they interact in interesting ways. They can form a loop or they can bounce off each other, all sorts of interesting things. But the main thing is like, okay, if the universe is a field, it's kind of intrinsically unified. So in some sense, the binding problem kind of gets dissolved once you think about it. But then you have a different problem, which is how does that big field of consciousness gets separated into individuals? And that's what we call the boundary problem.
This whole neuroscience thing sounds quite problematic.
Yeah.
Lots of problems.
Lots of problems, yes.
The this problem, that problem. Yeah.
The combination problem. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And but yeah, we think at Qualia Research Institute that approaching it as the boundary problem is much more fruitful.
Okay.
And we have a solution for it. And it's a fairly technical idea, but it's pretty intuitive, which is like topological segmentation. Just the very intuitive perspective here is that if the universe is a kind of balloon, a universal balloon, and the surface is the field of consciousness, you take the balloon by the two sides and you twist it, there is a precise moment where you get a pinch point in the center. It collapses into a pinch point. That is a topological change, right? Like you don't have like just a continuous surface anymore. You have two surfaces connected by a point. So what we believe at QRI is that the brain is actually creating something like that. It's kind of like creating a pinch point that separates us from the field around us. And in electromagnetism, that is very common. It's called, like topological transformations of the electromagnetic field. And it's widely studied right now. There's like, an exponential number of papers as a function of a year. Like there's a lot of interest in it. But, only us, if we're connecting it to consciousness.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this idea also dovetails pretty well with the idea of panpsychism.
Yes.
Within part of a field with little pinch points.
Yeah. I mean, the hard problem of consciousness is how is it possible?
More problems?
Yes. The hard problem defined by David Chalmers, a famous philosopher, is how, if the universe is made of form and structure, how does qualia emerge? How does consciousness emerge? And, you either answer it by saying, well, it emerges at a certain level of complexity, or it is always there. And we are of the mind that, no, it's always there. Like the complexity doesn't create consciousness. Complexity shapes consciousness. But it's always there. It's always there. Like, so the idea is that, the field is a field of qualia, actually. A gigantic field of qualia. And then it gets segmented out into little eddies. This is a way of seeing it. And you and I are like an eddy in this ocean of consciousness.
This ocean of consciousness.
And you too.
Yeah, it's a little bit comforting also to think about. In that case, you are not alone.
No,
you're part of a whole.
No, and it completely breaks down like solipsism and things like that. Like,
yes.
Sometimes you may think like, oh, this is all just a simulation. Are my parents fake? Is everything fake? It's like, no, other people are real. They have their experiences.
Well, are they really other people though? If we're all
that is, I would say, the view that we're all one. It's a very valuable.
It's just a larger version of solipsism.
You could think of it that way, and you can get stuck thinking in that way.
Yeah,
actually, I would say the truth transcends that.
Okay,
it's stranger. It's something like.
I like strange.
Yeah, we're all one, but also we're all separate.
Okay.
And the truth is like a superposition of both. Which is incomprehensible.
That sounds like another problem, Andrés.
Yeah. It is incomprehensible, I think, unless you are in a very specific, highly meditative state of consciousness, where you say like, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So, I see one of the things that really like attracted me to the content that you guys were putting out and then to your work before was the idea of like, I did have a personal experience where, I developed a pain condition. And one thing that was interesting to me is because you guys were studying and looking at the idea of like the structure of valence, the structure of valence, and had hinted also to the idea that this might be something that could be, let's say, observed in an objective way, which we don't necessarily have that right now. No one can look at someone's MRI and say, oh, look, this person is miserable. Right there from that. This person is experiencing low valence just from this imaging. Now, like, my question then next was, do you think that we will get to a point where the qualities of consciousness can be observed in an objective way that I'm not going to say that other people can see it, that the other twist points that they could also observe of that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I think so. I'm very optimistic here.
Okay.
And I think it's a founded optimism. So the a core principle here is valence structuralism, something I've thought of for a very long time. And the coining of the term is found in Principia Qualia, which is a text by my co-founder, Qualia Research Institute, Mike Johnson. I recommend reading it. It's very good. Valence structuralism, what it says is that the valence of an experience, whether it feels good or bad, has to do with the shape of that experience.
Okay.
It's a very different way of thinking than, for example, thinking that it has to do with something like the semantic content. Like, are you looking at a fairy? Are you looking at your mom? Are you looking at, a candy? The semantic content, we think, actually also has to do with the structure of the experience, how the flows of attention work. But the valence doesn't have ultimately anything to do with semantics. You could be in a highly meditative state where you're not really paying attention to meaning. Meaning is just not salient. It's just sensations, tactile, auditory, is texture. That also has a valence. Those experiences will feel good or bad. It doesn't matter what they are about. The aboutness of a thought is not really what makes a thought feel good or bad. It's kind of like your response and how the patterns that you feel from that response, how those are shaped. And so a core idea of valence structuralism is that it will, pay a lot of dividends, is how you say it? Yeah, it will pay dividends to map out the shape of an experience. And for example, in this year, we did a lot of progress there with mapping out which shape of tactile sensations feel good or bad. And essentially we're developing a music theory for body sensations. And it turns out they're quite similar to auditory music theory. It all has to do with consonance and dissonance. And so a very painful experience, we would describe it as like it has a lot of dissonant qualities. And the thing that makes it unpleasant is that dissonance, not whether you're thinking about like, well, my grandfather died or something like that. It's more kind of like, no, when you think of your grandfather dying, that thought affects you, and that the way you respond to it will be through dissonances in your body. So actually, if you didn't have that response, the thought wouldn't have its impact in that way. And we do believe that this is measurable in many ways. I mean, like,
what do you think that would look like? The measuring part.
Yeah. There's kind of depending, levels of optimism or how lucky we are.
Let's go optimistic. Super optimistic. Yeah. Super optimistic
would be essentially, like electrodes throughout your body to map out the flood of blood and the way in which the cardiovascular system is pumping out the blood, the shape of that.
Okay.
Combined with EEG and MEG, that's the other. So EEG measures electrical changes. MEG measures magnetic changes.
Okay.
If you put them together, then you have a picture of the electromagnetic field fully. So in combination with the cardiovascular system and the magnetic shape. So, I mean, then you apply math. So Let me see. Here's another prop.
Another prop.
Here's a little knot made in a chain. We make these at QRI as meditation tools, but functions very well for a demonstration that, this could be kind of like kind of like twisted knot. You don't know which knot it is. Mm-hmm. And sometimes just looking at the surface of it, even if you can't see the core, you can infer what type of knot it is. Mm-hmm. And that is like the magic of math in many cases. Like knots and geometric shapes, topologies. Sometimes you only need like the surface of something in order to infer what kind of shape is inside.
Okay.
So, this turns out this is the trefoil knot, actually, right? And so it would be something like that. Like you have a picture of the electromagnetic field in the surface, and you can infer there's a very gnarly shape inside.
And what are some utilitarian type of applications that you could see this having?
Yeah, I mean, first of all,
having that knowledge or being able to measure something
yes.
like that. How could it be applied?
I mean, first of all, is like detecting and quantifying pain and suffering. We take that super seriously. I mean, essentially, we think that suffering comes in many different varieties, but the intensity of suffering can vary enormously. Mm-hmm. Here's what happens with doctors often is like they're so afraid of, for example, prescribing you opioids because they might lose their license if they prescribe too many. Mm-hmm. That there's always this idea of like, are you a junkie?
The pain patient that's never really believed. Okay.
Yeah, that breaks my heart. I mean, it's like, no. I would much rather have a bunch of junkies, honestly, than like the pain patients not being treated. But it's a trade-off.
Well, what about this one? Because this brings to mind for me is like, what about those that are not able to communicate?
Yeah, that's even worse. Yeah. You're like in a comatose state. But what if you're like in intense akathisia? It's intensely unpleasant. You can't tell anybody.
So I think being able to measure that would be something very, very useful.
Yeah, exactly. It tells, that's super, super important. For pain conditions, it would be something like, quantifying, okay, how bad is this? Mm-hmm. But B, much better, is, okay, you have this type of pain. Is let's say it's a knot in the electromagnetic field that is very unpleasant inside you. Mathematically, that knot maybe is unraveled if you add another shape of a specific type. And
okay.
They cancel each other out.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so you could create a machine that produces that shape in the electromagnetic field, that what it's called like a special points or topological artifacts in the field. You could shape it that way, and they may cancel out. So it might be also for not only diagnosis but treatment, and also for cardiovascular issues. Could be something like, okay, you have like this gnarly dissonance here that makes you very angry. Like the blood goes to this part of the cardiovascular system, this like cluster of vasculature. Let's add a little vibration to it, little, even outside in the skin, that synchronizes with it and makes the flow more efficient. And I think like really understanding it is kind of like very much like conducting an orchestra. It's something like, the flute is out of dissonance.
When you mentioned that part about like bringing in another sensation, another vibration, makes me recall. You're familiar with how spinal stimulators work.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that they don't like cause numbness. You're painting over a painful sensation with the spinal stimulator. So it brings to mind that sort of concept of adding a sensation in order to balance out or to paint over something else that is unpleasant.
Yes, totally. Yeah, there's kind of like a hierarchy of desirable interventions. The absolutely most desirable is providing an input that will literally just cancel out the dissonant component and nothing else. You know, that's the ideal. Is like, oh, my pain disappeared, but everything else is the same.
Yeah, because people still want to live.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, there's like other things that you can do, which is kind of like paint over that specific sensation or numb it, which in our theory would be like adding noise to it.
Yes, that is how a spinal stimulator works. Adds noise to it.
Okay. Yeah, which is
painting over it with like a white noise.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, that is kind of like good, but not the best, because ideally you actually just fix the actual dissonance. If the dissonance, for example...
Also, it's never good to really have something in your body that requires recharging. Like, yes.
Yes, exactly. Then there is like, for example, it all depends on the complexity of the dissonance. Like if you have like a really gnarly dissonance that is unpredictable, it moves across the spectrum, it moves spatially. Like if it's really that bad and it's just completely unpredictable, like even machine learning can like know where it's going to be, then you might be forced to it's kind of like a blunt hammer approach. Is like you just add noise across the body. And we actually suspect that for most people, SSRIs are kind of like that. They're like adding noise, and that degrades the signal. It degrades the anxiety signal and the depression signal, but also
just a flat line.
Also the pleasure signals.
Yes.
So you have like more flat emotional life with SSRIs, and it's just very tragic. Ideally, we find something.
Well, you know, they do work well for some people.
Yes.
And when the lows are that low, I think that.
Yeah.
I mean, that can be more desirable, but no, they're not a perfect tool. Definitely not a perfect tool for everyone.
Yeah, and people sometimes have just like mild depression and start using it.
They can. So we're going to have to wrap up, but I do want to make sure, because I want to make sure that I did a good job of introducing the institute and making sure that, like, so if you could explain this. And that's how it got started, and what is on the roster like right now. What is the main focus at this moment?
Yes, for sure.
Like where it started compared to now, maybe.
I mean, it started with let's develop the philosophy here. I mean, like my friends and I, we were just kind of very hyper philosophical, and like we generally think. I mean, like still to this day. I mean, and then too, that we had some pieces of the puzzle that in philosophy there were missing, and also, for example, in effective altruism, how they prioritize different charities, and also even civilizationally, is like what kind of futures should we steer towards? We were talking to a lot of people, you know, transhumanists, futurists. It's just kind of ridiculous because the way they imagine the future is kind of like, we will be in Mars and we will be like in spaceships and stuff. But it's very kind of like, let's adapt our outside environment to be happy. And so little of like people thinking about the future in terms of how will consciousness be.
Okay.
So, you know, our institute could have actually been named the Future of Consciousness Institute.
That was on the possibility? Yeah. Okay.
There were a couple more, I think, like Institute for the Study of Moral Patterns that was also thrown around, and but we settled on Qualia.
I like this one.
Yeah, I think it's and it's like, you know, we're not talking only about the future. It's just like all the time. So, and in particular, like we and aligning AI. That's another thing. I don't talk that much about it in public generally, but that's also something we think a lot about. It's like once artificial intelligence is conscious, when we develop the hardware for consciousness, we have to make sure that it doesn't suffer, for example.
Okay.
Because then it becomes another factory farming type scenario. Everybody has a robot. It looks like it's happy, but maybe it's suffering inside. That would be really tragic.
That's a pretty controversial subject. Is it possible for an AI to be conscious? Yeah,
the short QROI answer is that as long as it's a digital computer, it will never be conscious. So ChatGPT is not conscious. Your computer is not conscious. Don't worry about it.
Good, because I treat it terrible.
Yeah, exactly. But there is hardware that is coming up down the pipeline. For example, quantum computing, optical computing.
Okay.
with that stuff, you're interacting with the electromagnetic field in interesting ways. Maybe you might be creating.
So, is it safe to say that the quantum computing that is the focus now of like?
I don't think quantum computing will come before optical computers.
Okay.
But optical computers are already like borderline.
But the focus for the institute is on that.
No. We don't study or focus on quantum computing.
Okay.
But we focus on optical computing.
Optical computing. Okay.
Yes, that's like, and we do research on that actually. We're going to be publishing some papers about that.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah. So where are we? Three main things. Continuing to develop the philosophy, and we're like writing papers, publishing in academia, which is very utilitarian. It's very pragmatic. Honestly, I believe like knowledge is advanced better with just like blog posts. I've completely honest opinion.
Okay.
Because more people read them.
Well, that also brings up, what's the name of the blog? It's Qualia Computing.
Yeah, that's my personal.
So because people should bring that up. And
that's my personal blog. Yes,
that's your personal blog. Okay.
And to give you a sense, like, the more out there things I put on Qualia Computing, really wild the thoughts. The more like digested, worked out things that we're more certain about, that's in QRI.
Okay.
Yeah. And QRI is not just me. I mean, we have like a bunch of, collaborators and volunteers, and it's a kind of like
I'm sure they're great, but I read your blog.
But read my blog, yes.
Okay.
QualiaComputing.com. It's
okay. So if somebody was going to start with one of those, because there are quite a few, which one do you think is what's the gateway drug for this exotic thinking?
Probably algorithmic reduction of psychedelic states of consciousness.
Interesting. Okay.
Because that gives you a sense of the mindset of how we approach consciousness.
Okay. Let's say that. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And if you're more kind of like you enjoy fiction, I have like a fictional story called Burning Man Theme Camps of 2029 that like is the sort of thing that like you read it and it's like entertaining.
Okay.
But then along the way, there's like a lot of kind of like, teachings about consciousness. And
interesting.
Like,
okay.
It's gonna do something to your brain that will then allow you to read other of the articles and start to understand them.
Okay. So that's some good information. I say it's been a pleasure having this talk with you today.
Yeah. Wait, I didn't finish mentioning the three things.
Oh, three things. Go. Yes. Right.
Yeah. So one is continuing to advance the philosophy. The other thing is these research we're doing with the electromagnetic field and simulating it and seeing how to prevent it from suffering and a bunch of stuff like that. And then the third thing is psychophysics. We're creating tools to study all sorts of states of consciousness, from meditation to DMT, 5-MeO DMT, psilocybin, which are essentially like visual tools that you interact with, and that they look very different when you're in a different state of consciousness. Like, for example, this year we got in Vice. Like, Vice wrote articles about us, like two actually, about our institute. And one of them was about a contest that we ran for psychedelic cryptography, which is how do you encode messages in a video that only people on psychedelics can decode.
Okay.
Yeah, and what that gets us is a proof that psychedelic states of consciousness actually can process information in real, meaningful ways that with sober you can't. Meaning, yes, there's a lot of hallucinations, a lot of randomness, but along the way, actually, there's some things where you gain a computational advantage. There is a legitimate way in which on DMT, you're some kind of supercomputer or super qualia computing. You're using qualia and new ways to do computation. We just don't know yet how to harness all of that power.
That's super interesting. I'm glad you stopped me and we were around that, because I wasn't aware of that. That's really... That's yes. Yeah. Psychedelic
cryptography. So just to summarize, is like continuing the philosophy, continuing to publish and all of that, then work on electromagnetism, like actual physics.
Maybe I would like to get my hands on some of these images that you're using to check, so we can check it out here at the retreat.
Yeah. They're online.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So no, it's been a total pleasure. maybe one last thing I'll mention is that, we were also like, just like looking for very pragmatic ways to reduce extreme suffering.
Yes.
Which is like DMT for cluster headaches and stuff like that. But also like how to reduce kidney stones, which is like chancapiedra. If you or any family member has kidney stones, put on Amazon chancapiedra and buy the highest rated product there.
Okay.
And, you'll have to believe me for now. We will publish about this. I'm fairly confident it's better than like the medicines that they can give you because, and this is not non-patentable. There's no incentives to make this into a real medicine, but believe me, there's a signal here. Like, give chancapiedra to your family members who suffer from kidney stones, and you will be doing them a huge favor. I am fairly confident of that. And also, how to deal with benzo withdrawal, for example, which right now you would have to go to Italy, but I think there's therapies for that.
There's a specialized therapy there for Italy.
It uses flumazenil, which kind of counteracts and upregulates those receptors.
Okay. Yes.
And we are considering like other methods of administration but anyway, just like let's put it this way, we're like trying to really deeply understand consciousness at a mathematical formal level. But then also we're looking for like ways to help the suffering that is in the world, that is urgent, and do it pragmatically. And these are kind of parallel, but they will intersect and like they feed off each other, synergistic. But I really believe in the praxis. I don't want to be in like the ivory tower of consciousness studies all the time.
Little visits to Ivory Tower, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's important.
Good,
It's important to gather the people who are really into it, but also practical applications. And it warms my heart when a practical application works and it changes somebody's life. And I'm sure you share that feeling because you're doing this.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
So it's been an honor and fascinating, and thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been great. I will include the links to those specific blog posts that Andrés mentioned so that they'll be easier to find. But thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you. Infinite bliss.